My name's Michael. I'm 46, and I've lived in Carbondale, Illinois most of my life. I built my business from the ground up, a small but thriving chain of outdoor gear stores that expanded online when e-commerce started taking off. I wasn't born into money. I earned every dime with sweat and sleepless nights. When I met Cassie, it felt like a rare gift. She was smart, gorgeous, with a quick laugh that could brighten a room. She said she loved the ambition she saw in me. And for a while, I believed her. We'd been together 5 years, engaged for almost one. At first, she was supportive, attending trade shows with me, helping brainstorm ideas for the website, even cheering me on when I decided to open that second store. But lately, something had shifted. Cassie started pushing me to sign the prenup we'd agreed on before getting engaged, but with some new language her lawyer suggested for clarity. I didn't think much of it at first. Trust is the foundation of a relationship, right? But then she got a little too pushy. She kept reminding me about protecting both of us and securing our future, always with that sweet smile and a kiss on my cheek. It didn't sit right, but I brushed it off. Until one night, I noticed the draft on her laptop while she was in the shower. The document was open, and the wording was off. Clauses about profit sharing, future expansion rights, control over online sales. All pointed to her having a much bigger stake in my company than we'd ever discussed. That was the first crack in the foundation. I could have pretended I hadn't seen it. Could have convinced myself it was just a misunderstanding, or maybe that Cassie was getting bad advice from her lawyer. But something about the way she'd been acting lately, the insistence, the urgency, the way she tried to brush past my concerns, it all pointed to something darker. So, I did something I'm not exactly proud of. While she was in the shower, I took screenshots of the document, every single page. I wanted proof just in case. Then I sat back down, pretending nothing had happened, even as my heart was hammering in my chest. The next morning, I called my lawyer, not the one Cassie recommended, but an old friend from college who had seen me through thick and thin. I sent him the screenshots and asked him to look them over. His reply came back the same afternoon. Michael, this is not a prenup. This is a hostile takeover. Those were his exact words. A hostile takeover. I felt my stomach twist into knots. Cassie hadn't just added a few clauses for clarity. She was rewriting the entire agreement to secure herself a piece of everything I'd built, and not just what existed now. The clauses about future expansions and online sales meant she'd be entitled to profit from ventures I hadn't even dreamed up yet. And the kicker? The clauses were written in such a way that if I refused, she could frame it as me being controlling or paranoid. She had me boxed in. I sat on that revelation for 2 days, trying to convince myself it wasn't as bad as it looked. Maybe Cassie was just scared, or her brother, who'd been circling like a vulture ever since we got engaged, had fed her some bad ideas. But the more I thought about it, the more obvious it became. She wasn't acting alone. See, her brother Darren had always been sniffing around my business. He was one of those guys who thought he was smarter than everyone, but couldn't keep a steady job to save his life. Last Christmas, he'd cornered me in the kitchen at Cassie's parents' house, dropping hints about how I should think about the future and how family connections could make things easier. I brushed him off at the time, but now it all clicked. So I confronted her. I waited until we were home, just the two of us, no distractions. I showed her the screenshots and asked her straight. Did you rewrite the prenup? Cassie's face went pale for a split second, but then she recovered with a practiced smile. She laughed, a soft, dismissive sound, and said I was overreacting. Those are just standard protections, she claimed, waving her hand like I was some anxious child. My lawyer thought it would be safer for both of us. In case the business grows. Safer for both of us. My blood boiled, but I kept my voice level. I asked her if Darren had anything to do with this, and her smile faltered. She denied it, of course, but the hesitation was there. That's when I realized this wasn't just Cassie being cautious. This was a plan, one where she and Darren would lock me into a legal corner, one where they'd both profit off everything I'd worked for. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was a tornado of what-ifs, every scenario playing out like some twisted choose-your-own nightmare. If I went along with it, I'd be signing over control of my life's work. If I refused, I'd look like the controlling, paranoid fiancé, the bad guy. I'd lose Cassie, her family would turn against me, and my reputation could take a hit. And if I exposed Darren's involvement, it might blow back on me, especially if they spun the story right. But the one thing I couldn't do was stay silent. The next morning, I made the decision. I was going to call the wedding off. There was no way I was going to tie myself to someone who was willing to betray me like this. But I also knew Cassie wasn't going to make it easy. She was too smart, too calculating. So I needed proof, indisputable, undeniable evidence. I started gathering everything. The screenshots, the original prenup drafts, and record from my lawyer showing when and how the new clauses appeared. I even went so far as to pull security footage from my office's cameras, which showed Darren sneaking in after hours with Cassie's spare key. That was the moment that sealed it for me. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. This was a coordinated, premeditated move. Armed with my evidence, I confronted Cassie again, this time in public, at a dinner with both our families at a fancy restaurant in Carbondale. She had no idea it was coming. I stood up just after the appetizers, cleared my throat, and in front of her parents, Darren, and a room full of diners, I laid it all out. The evidence. The rewritten prenup. Darren's fingerprints all over the scheme. I could see her face drain of color, her father's jaw tightening, her mother gasping, and Darren looking like he wanted to crawl under the table. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I spoke calmly, like I was reading a weather report. But I ended with a simple line that left no room for doubt. The wedding is off, and the trust is broken beyond repair. Cassie tried to recover, stammering about misunderstandings and protecting the family, but it was too late. Her father's face turned an ugly shade of red, her mother burst into tears, and Darren slunk out like a scolded dog. The restaurant went dead silent. But that wasn't the end of it. Later that night, I started getting texts from Cassie, from her family, even from mutual friends. They were furious at me for airing private family matters in public. Some called me cruel, others accused me of blowing things out of proportion. But I knew what they were really mad about. I'd ruined their plan. I called them out in front of witnesses. And here's the kicker. Cassie's father, a retired judge with connections, tried to pressure me into reconsidering for the sake of family unity. He even offered to have the prenup revised so everything looked legitimate. I refused, politely but firmly. Cassie's family then turned on me completely. Overnight, I was branded the villain. Social media posts painted me as the selfish fiancé who couldn't handle sharing success. Friends I thought I could count on backed away, afraid of getting caught in the crossfire. But I held my ground. The next twist? Cassie's brother, Darren, didn't just vanish quietly. A few days later, I found out he'd been shopping around for a job at my company. Apparently, he thought he could charm his way into a position in upper management, a cushy title, and a six-figure salary for doing absolutely nothing. It wasn't until I refused to return his calls that he started sending veiled threats. Not outright blackmail, but the kind of insinuations that make you check your locks twice before going to bed. That's when I decided to go nuclear. I sent everything I had, the screenshots, the footage, the revised prenup, to a trusted journalist friend in St. Louis who'd covered local business scandals before. She ran the story, keeping my name out of it, but exposing the scheme in detail. It wasn't long before whispers turned into headlines. Cassie's family's reputation took a nosedive, Darren's ambitions were publicly torched, and Cassie herself had to move back home. Her wedding dress sold on Facebook Marketplace for a fraction of what she paid. Me? I stayed right where I was, kept my business intact, and rebuilt my circle from scratch. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. In the days after that dinner, it felt like I was living in the eye of a storm. The fallout was immediate and ugly. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all wanting the inside scoop or fishing for gossip. Some were genuinely curious. Others just wanted to see the train wreck unfold. Social media was on fire. Cassie's family put out statements painting me as vindictive, selfish, and not the man they thought I was. They called it a tragic misunderstanding, said I was lashing out from stress, and hinted that I'd made false accusations. At first, I tried to ignore it. I kept my head down, focused on work, and told myself it would blow over. But then it got personal. Cassie's friends started messaging my clients, suggesting I was unstable, unreliable, even dangerous. One of my longtime suppliers emailed me, asking if everything was okay, because they'd heard rumors that I was in financial trouble and being sued for fraud. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Cassie or the wedding. This was Darren's handiwork, trying to poison the well and ruin my business from the inside out. He couldn't get a job at my company, so he decided to burn it down from the outside. I wasn't going to let that happen. I called my lawyer, the one who'd reviewed the prenup, and asked him to draft cease and desist letters for every slanderous post, message, or email we could trace back to Cassie or her family. He worked fast, and within a day, we had a stack of legal documents ready to go. I personally emailed them to every offender, attaching proof of my evidence in a polite but firm note. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist from further defamatory statements. Failure to comply will result in legal action. It worked. The posts were deleted. The rumors died down. The whispers turned into awkward silence. But that wasn't enough for me. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to go on the offensive. I reached out to a few trusted business contacts, explaining the situation without getting into the sordid details. I made it clear that Darren and Cassie's family were behind the smear campaign. I reassured them that my company was solid, our finances were intact, and I had the legal receipts to prove it. To my surprise, most of them were sympathetic. A few even admitted they'd seen similar tactics used against competitors before. Then came the twist. A week after the restaurant confrontation, I got an anonymous package in my office. No return address, just a manila envelope with a USB drive inside. Might get twisted as I plugged it into a secure, offline laptop. The files on that drive? Recordings. Hours of audio from Darren and Cassie's strategy sessions. Conversations where they plotted to take over my business, bragged about their plans to sideline me, and even discussed how they'd frame me as abusive if I resisted. It was like watching a slow-motion train crash, except this time I had the power to stop it. I didn't waste time. I called my lawyer, forwarded him the files, and asked him to prepare a case. Not just a civil suit, but a full-on fraud and conspiracy complaint. With the evidence I had, Darren and Cassie were in serious legal jeopardy. And as for the anonymous source, I had a strong suspicion it was one of Darren's former friends, or maybe someone in his inner circle who realized the ship was sinking and wanted to jump off before it went down. Either way, I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Once the recordings hit my lawyer's desk, things moved fast. Faster than I expected. To be honest, he called me that same evening, his voice equal parts cautious and impressed. "Michael, you've got them dead to rights," he said. "This isn't just a prenup dispute anymore. This is premeditated fraud and conspiracy. We can take this to court, and we'll win." But I wasn't looking for a courtroom drama. I wanted resolution, and I wanted it clean. I knew dragging this out publicly would hurt my business more than it would hurt them. The media was already circling after the story leaked in St. Louis, and the last thing I wanted was for my clients to start doubting my judgment. So, I told my lawyer to reach out quietly to Cassie's family, offering them a choice. Either we settle this privately, or I go public with everything. Their response? Predictable. Cassie's father, that smug old judge, tried to call my bluff. Said I wouldn't dare drag family matters into the courts, that I'd look like a bitter ex-fiancé out for revenge. He even offered me a tidy sum, hush money, basically to keep it all quiet. I almost laughed. I didn't need their money. I needed my dignity. So, I told him, through my lawyer of course, that his offer wasn't just insulting, it was pathetic. If they thought I'd roll over after everything they'd done, they didn't know me at all. That's when things got messy. Really messy. A few days after the failed hush money attempt, someone, and I'm not naming names, but let's just say I'd bet my left boot it was Darren, tried to break into my office. They triggered the alarm system, which sent the cops and my security team rushing in. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. Back off. Let go. But I wasn't backing off. Instead, I doubled down. I hired a private investigator to keep an eye on Cassie's family. Not because I wanted dirt, I already had enough, but because I wanted to be prepared. If they were willing to stoop to threats and intimidation, I needed to know what they'd do next. The PI didn't take long to report back. Turns out, Darren wasn't just a schemer. He was desperate. Gambling debts, shady connections, even rumors of him skimming off a trust fund Cassie's father had set up for her. He was circling the drain and trying to drag everyone down with him. Meanwhile, Cassie herself started to crack. She showed up at my office one morning, unannounced, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Gone was the polished, confident woman who used to walk into business dinners with me, like she owned the room. This Cassie was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice trembling. She begged me to reconsider, to forgive her, to think about the love we'd shared. She even tried to blame Darren entirely, saying he'd pressured her, that she'd been scared of losing me if she didn't go along with his plan. For a moment, and I hate admitting this, I almost believed her. I almost let myself forget the recordings, the rewritten prenup, the lies. But then I remembered that look on her face the night I confronted her in front of both our families. That cold calculation, the fake smile, the way she tried to manipulate me even then. So I told her as gently as I could that there was no going back. That trust, once broken this badly, doesn't heal with apologies. She started to cry, real, raw tears. Or maybe they were just another layer of the performance. Either way, I stood my ground. I offered to settle quietly, to avoid more damage, but only if she and Darren both signed agreements waiving any claims to my business, present or future. She hesitated, tried to negotiate for a better deal, but I was done playing games. My lawyer had already drafted the paperwork. The final twist came when Darren himself tried to contact me, directly this time. A shaky voicemail at 2 a.m., slurring words I couldn't fully make out, but the message was clear. He was sorry. Sorry for getting caught. Sorry for dragging Cassie into it. Sorry for underestimating me. He even hinted that if I dropped the case, he'd disappear from my life for good. I saved that voicemail. It wasn't much, but it was the final piece of leverage I needed to seal the deal. After that late-night voicemail from Darren, I finally saw the full scope of how deep this mess ran. He wasn't just desperate. He was unraveling. His arrogance had crumbled into panic. I forwarded that voicemail to my lawyer, and we both agreed. It was time to close this chapter for good. The next morning, I called Cassie. No text, no email, just a direct call. She didn't pick up at first, probably seeing my name on the screen and hesitating. But I tried again, and this time she answered. Her voice was hollow, like she'd been crying all night. I told her as calmly as I could that I wasn't interested in playing this game any longer. I had the evidence, the leverage, and if she and Darren didn't sign a settlement waiving all claims to my business, I'd go public. It wasn't a threat. It was a simple fact. She hesitated, as if still hoping to charm me into reconsidering, but I was past that. After a long pause, she agreed to meet at my lawyer's office the next morning. That night, I barely slept, half expecting some last-ditch stunt from her or Darren. But morning came quietly. At exactly 10 a.m., Cassie arrived, looking exhausted. No makeup, eyes red from crying. Darren wasn't with her, maybe too ashamed or too afraid to face me. She sat across from me, hands trembling as she signed the papers. No more claims to my business. No share in future profits. Just a clean break. I signed last. My hand felt heavier than it should have. As my pen scrawled across the page, I felt an odd mix of relief and regret. Not for losing Cassie, but for ever trusting someone enough to give them a chance to betray me. Cassie didn't say a word when it was over. She gathered her purse, gave me one last hollow look, and left. And then came the final twist. That afternoon, another anonymous envelope arrived at my office. No return address, just a plain manila envelope with a single sheet of paper, a printout of a bank transfer. Darren's name was on it, tied to a hefty payment from shell company connected to one of my competitors. My stomach twisted. Darren hadn't just been trying to take over my business. He'd been feeding confidential information to a rival. I stared at the paper for a long time, the weight of it sinking in. Darren wasn't just a schemer. He was a traitor. And Cassie? Whether she knew or not, she'd been part of his game. The next day, I handed the document to my lawyer along with everything else. We filed a civil suit against Darren and the shell company for conspiracy and corporate espionage. It wouldn't be quick and it wouldn't be quiet, but I wasn't going to let them get away with it. As for Cassie's family, they vanished from the public eye. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. Her father's name disappeared from local charity boards. Darren stopped showing up at business events. Cassie deleted her social media, moved to a small apartment, and faded into the background. I, on the other hand, rebuilt. Stronger, smarter, and with walls no one like Darren or Cassie could ever climb again. After Cassie signed those papers, the silence that followed was deafening. No more voicemails from Darren, no more texts from Cassie's family, no social media mudslinging. It was as if they had all vanished into thin air. But I knew better. They weren't gone. They were regrouping, licking their wounds, waiting for an opportunity to spin the narrative back in their favor. The lawsuit against Darren and that shell company wasn't going to be quick or easy. My lawyer warned me that these cases take time, years sometimes, but I was ready for the long haul. I had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by standing my ground. This wasn't just about my business anymore. It was about my integrity, my self-respect. In the weeks that followed, I focused on damage control. I reached out personally to clients and partners, explaining what had happened without diving into the messy details. I kept it professional but firm, reassuring them that my company was solid and that I wasn't backing down. To my surprise, most of them were supportive. Some even shared their own stories of betrayal and business backstabbing. It turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been burned. The irony? Cassie's betrayal, as painful as it was, cleared the path for me to see who truly had my back. The people who stayed, who believed in me even when the gossip was thick, became the foundation for the next phase of my business. Cassie, meanwhile, disappeared from Carbondale. Rumor had it she moved to a small apartment in Springfield, working some low-profile job. Darren vanished from public view entirely. Cassie's father quietly stepped down from several charity boards, and her mother retreated into silence. They didn't just lose face, they lost their social standing, their reputations, and any leverage they thought they had. I'd be lying if I said I felt triumphant. What I really felt was empty. A quiet sadness lingered at the edges of my life, a constant reminder that trust, once shattered, never quite heals. Even when you win, you lose something. But maybe that's what growth feels like, the ache of lessons learned, the slow, painful shedding of illusions. It took longer than I'd like to admit to rebuild, not just my business, but myself. After everything blew up, I found myself waking up at night with that heavy, hollow feeling like I'd misplaced a piece of myself in the wreckage. Even though I'd won, technically, I couldn't shake the sense of loss. I trusted someone with my future, my work, my heart, and she'd torn it apart for a shot at control. But business, like life, doesn't stop for grief. I went back to the basics. I focused on my stores, on the people who had stood by me when the storm hit hardest. I personally called clients, suppliers, even old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. I explained the situation, not the ugly details, just the facts. I reminded them why they trusted me in the first place. And to my surprise, most of them didn't hesitate. Orders picked back up. Partnerships were renewed. I even found a few new investors, people who respected how I'd handled the whole debacle. They didn't care about the headlines. They cared about the fact that I hadn't folded, hadn't let the mess define me. That's when I realized something. Sometimes the people who stay are more important than the ones who leave. Cassie and Darren and their schemes have been like deadweight, dragging me down while I thought they were part of my future. When they were gone, I felt lighter. I felt free. I took that energy and poured it back into the business. We expanded our online presence, streamlined inventory, improved customer service. I even started mentoring a few young entrepreneurs in Carbondale, something I'd always meant to do, but had been too busy before. It felt good to give back, to build something real, not just for me, but for others. But the past had a way of creeping back in. One afternoon, months later, I got a message from a mutual friend. Cassie had been spotted in town, at a grocery store of all places, looking pale and drawn, her once confident posture replaced by hunched shoulders. She'd lost weight, looked older than her years. Rumor had it she was scraping by on part-time work, that Darren had abandoned her when the lawsuit hit. I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing. That was the final shift for me. I realized I'd let her occupy too much space in my head for too long. Whatever she was dealing with now, it wasn't my burden to carry. I wasn't responsible for her choices. I was free.